Okay, so this is the Bible study for 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 24 through chapter 18, verse 18. And the text says, David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Absalom had appointed Amasa over the army in place of Joab. Amasa was the son of Jether, an Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash and the sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Joab. The Israelites and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. Then David came to Mahanaim, or when David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, son of Nahash from Reba of the Ammonites, and Machir, son of Amiel from Lodebar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They also brought wheat and barley, flour and roasted grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, sheep and cheese from cow's milk for David and his people to eat. For they said, the people have become exhausted and hungry and thirsty in the wilderness. David mustered the men who were with him and appointed over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. David sent out his troops, a third under the command of Joab, a third under Joab's brother Abishai of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. The king told the troops, I myself will surely march out with you. But the men said, you must not go out. If we are forced to flee, they won't even care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city. The king answered, I will do whatever. So the king stood beside the gate while all his men marched out in units of hundreds and of thousands. The king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. David's army marched out of the city to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. Israel's troops were routed by David's men, and the casualties that day were great, 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair while the mule he was riding kept going. When one of the men saw what had happened, he told Joab, I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree. Joab said to the man who told him this, what? You saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have had to give you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt. But the man replied, even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lay a hand on the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me. Joab said, I'm not going to wait like this for you. So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him into a big pit in the forest, and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the king's valley as a monument to himself, for he thought, I have no son to carry on the memory of my name. He named the pillar after himself, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. Okay, so remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along as we study this text. Number 1 says, what has happened in our last Bible study? A, Ahithophel gave Absalom advice to attack David quickly with a smaller group while he and his men are tired from traveling. And I'll just say some of the things maybe we learned early in this text might suggest, as we were talking about what the best advice was, and it was difficult to tell that that the advice that Ahithophel had given was indeed good advice and may have changed the course of this battle. B, Absalom got a second opinion from Hushai, who was siding with David, and Hushai told him to wait and send all of Israel's army, which is what they ended up doing. And we see that in this text, and didn't work. C, Absalom decided to use Hushai's advice, and Hushai sent the priest's sons to tell David. That's true. D, Absalom was told about these spies telling David, so he sent somebody to search for them, but they were hidden. And E, Ahithophel hung himself when he realized that the king no longer took his advice as the word of God. And all of that's true in what happened. Number 2 says what happened next in 1724 through 18:2. A, Absalom sent his army across the Jordan under the command of Amasa. That's true, and I mean that. I guess it says in place of Joab because Joab was with David, and so we know who's commanding David's armies, and we're told that. But also we're told about who's commanding Absalom's army, or really at this point Israel's army under King Absalom. B, David stopped and was brought bedding and food because his people were exhausted and hungry. And this is what I was referring to. See, they were sort of resupplied by folks in the area where they had stopped because they were so hungry. And you know what would have happened if Absalom had overtaken them more quickly with a smaller group, while they were still famished and exhausted. C, David appointed commanders of thousands and hundreds and committed to march out with his men. So we see 3 trusted people, Joab and his brother that survives, because remember he had 2 brothers, but one was killed. So Joab and his brother, and then Ittai the Gittite, who was committed to coming out here with David, even though David tried to send him back and say, you shouldn't have to wander in the desert with me. And then David said, I'm going to go out with you. This is my battle to fight. I'm going to march out. And this is just an interesting piece of the text that maybe we can take something from. I think as a leader, I consider this concept because I'm the kind of one that is very hands-on. That like David, I think I should be at everything. I should be there whenever somebody in the church is doing something, whenever there's a battle to fight, if you will. I feel like I ought to be there. And that's been, I think, always the way I've been. But certainly in ministry, it's been something that's been, you know, I would say I've almost taken pride in it, that I'm one that doesn't miss when somebody's doing ministry so often. And I've had to consider whether that's always best for the church. And this is a moment when David is being asked to consider. He commits to go out, but he's being asked to consider whether him going out and being that hands-on is best for the kingdom and for all of them. Number 3 says, what happened in 18:3 through 5? A, David's men told him he couldn't go. It didn't matter if half of them were dead, but he needed to remain alive. They wanted him to stay in the city. B, then that's true. B, David did what his men thought was best, which is, I think, sometimes wisdom. C, the king commanded his commanders be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake, which is a whole other discussion we'll have here. And D, all the men heard the king give these orders. So two things And we might say that maybe they didn't want David to go out there because they wanted to take care of this business in the second part in these in C and D. But and they knew David wouldn't do it, perhaps. But I would say this, that they're right, that I mean, even Ahithophel's advice was kill David and everybody else will come back to Israel. And these guys are saying, nope, nobody cares if half of us are dead. They're out here to get you. So you're the one we have to protect. If Israel's going to be the nation that we want it to be, and we think God wants it to be, then we need you protected. Now, I mean, in ministry, it's a little bit different, in that I don't think I don't think generally me being at a ministry event is I'm going to die. And first of all, I don't think anybody's fighting any of these battles for me anyway. And so none of that matters in the same way that it did then. But on the other hand, there is a sense, my district superintendent, Dr. Huff, my first district superintendent, told me that I needed to consider this. It was one of his mentoring moments with me, and he asked me to consider what things only I could do, and do those things. In other words, there are things in the church that anybody can do, and we should probably delegate those things. And then there are certain things that other people can't do. So for instance, if my schedule's so busy that I'm at every event, but then I don't spend the time preparing the sermons, which is the thing, not that only I can do, because we have staff that also do that now, but that's the thing that I'm the primary one that does, and I'm the one that often does. And if I'm okay, I'm at this event and that event and that event, but then, you know, because of a full-time job that I have now or whatever, I don't have a time to prepare a sermon, then the church is not better off for that. There's certain people that we're raising up in ministry that I have to spend time with, that I have to invest in. And if they spent time with someone else, it wouldn't be the same time, it wouldn't be for the same purpose as perhaps the time that they spend with me. So there's certain things that only I can do. And to be honest with you, some people want me to be at every event. And if I'm not there, they kind of feel like, well, either this event is not important to the church, or the pastor's not supporting me in my event, or this thing that I think he should be placing importance on. And it's a wrestle for me sometimes to listen to advice and to do the things that I know I need to do, instead of all the things that I know people probably expect me to do, or I feel like I should do. So that's a small part of this. But then we have these instructions to be gentle with Absalom. And in the midst of those instructions, we wonder, well, maybe they wanted David to stay back so that they could handle this, because they knew how David was going to handle this if he was, and that's a possibility too. But certainly David wanted them to be gentle with his son. He didn't want this to be about killing his son. And we're going to discuss whether that was wisdom or not, and whether what happened may have been the kind of thing that if David wasn't personally involved, and if it wasn't his son, that he might have thought should be the right thing too. So blind spots when we're personally involved. So then number 4 says, what was the outcome of the battle according to 18:5-8? So it says, the king stood beside, starting in 5, it says, the king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And then in verse 6, it says, David's army marched out of the city to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There, Israel's troops were routed by David's men, and the casualties that day were great. 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. So David routed Israel's army, even though they waited and took all of the men. And the forest was swallowing up people. And so I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I know what we see about Absalom. Apparently, the forest kind of swallowed him up as well. And so there were dangers of the forest. There were things that enabled travel and fighting to, or did not able travel and fighting easily. And so perhaps what happened was they fell into danger that was more natural. Number 5 says, what happened in 18, 9, and 10? A, Absalom happened to meet David's men, it says. B, he was riding his mule. C, as the mule went under thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair while the mule he was riding kept on going. And this, I mean, if it wasn't so tragic and if it wasn't the end that happened, would have been quite, I mean, I think humorous. It's a funny thought that a guy with all this beautiful heavy hair is riding his mule and through a thick forest, and his hair gets caught in the tree, and his mule keeps going, and now he's stuck in the tree where he's the king, and all this, you know, sort of might, I guess, that's associated with a king leading into battle. And yet here he is helpless hanging in a tree because of all this hair that got caught in the tree. And maybe that we might go back and say this just shows that Absalom was not up to the task of leading Israel in a lot of ways, that he had big talk about how great a leader he could be, but he never really, never really happened because he was, at least it seems like, somewhat inept at least certain things, like riding a mule through the forest, I guess. So here he is helpless. Number 6 says, how did Joab respond according to 18:11? Joab said to the man who told him this, what, you saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt. So Joab's response to the man saying, I saw him hanging in an oak tree, was, why didn't you kill him? Number 7, what was the man's response? So the man had a response to that. The man replied, even if 1,000 shekels were weighed into my hands, I would not lay a hand on the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I put my life in jeopardy and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from him. So his answer was, no, we heard the command he gave to you. I'm not going to kill that guy. And if I had, you would have backed away from me and let me take the fall for that. So there's no way I was doing, I don't care how much you pay me. I'd have gotten killed. They know how David responded to Ishbosheth's death. They know how David responded to people being proud when Jonathan and Saul were killed, people being proud of having a hand in someone's death when David is trying to protect them. So no, I'm not going to do that. So then number 8 says, what did Joab do next according to 18, 14, and 15? So Joab said, I'm not going to wait like this for you. So in other words, I'm not, okay, you don't have to do it. That's fine. I'm going to do it. So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. So they made sure he was dead. 3 javelins and a few other guys standing around him. So number 9 says, why do you think Joab did this? Well, it's funny. Joab was Absalom's supporter. Joab was the one that asked for Absalom to come back, for David to bring him back. And of course, maybe he didn't like that Absalom burned his field. But in the end, when Ahithophel gave the advice to Absalom, let's go strike David down with a smaller force, quicker, we'll strike David down and there'll be no war, and all of David's guys will come back, and this will end it. Already 20,000 men had died in the forest because of David, well, really Absalom going out to war with David. Remember that David left Jerusalem so that there would not be war that destroyed the city and killed so many people. Absalom pursued him out there, and now this fighting, I mean, David's winning, but Israel is losing its warriors. And here's Joab. Joab did this, and what happened next? Number 10 says, what happened next according to 18:16 through 18. Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him in a big pile, so they buried him. So the war was over as soon as Absalom was dead. So they could have kept him. I mean, maybe they could have taken him captive and held him, and David would have, and the war still would have ended. I don't know. But it's interesting that as soon as Absalom was dead, this war ended. And isn't that the kind of thing David did from the beginning? But he didn't want his son to be killed, and so he didn't want that to be the end of it. But would it have been continued fighting if Joab hadn't done this? You know, I don't know how to judge this. I think Joab disobeyed a direct order from David, and we can say, ah, man, this is not going to go well, or this is not what he should have done. But at the same time, it ended the war very quickly, and nobody else had to die. The one who started the war was dead, and man, these are hard things. But this is the end of a chapter, and this is the end of it's not literally the end of a chapter, as it turns out, but it's the end of a chapter in this story that may have drug on a little longer if it hadn't ended this way. So but that's what happened. Then it was over, and you know, Absalom's monument stood in the Valley of the Kings, but Absalom was no more. And the end of this piece of the war that was very painful for Israel, and I'm sure for David as well.